Springfield Church of the Brethren Message of the Week. Good morning and welcome to the Springfield Church of the Brethren Message of the Week. I am Pastor Dave Weiss, and this is our message for the week of 5/3. And our message today is entitled, What is Truth? I have to confess, I'm a little bit disappointed this morning. I had originally come in and recorded this message in our sanctuary so you could see me preaching from the pulpit, and something went wrong and I wasn't able to convert it over so I could upload it into something you could use. So we're back to this format. I'm going to keep trying, but I'm not sure how long it's going to take. Again, our theme is, What is Truth? Last week we finished our combined series of Easter and Love Feast. It was called the Hallel series. But before we leave the Easter story completely behind, there is one more place I want to go. I want to go to Jesus' trial before Pilate. The chief priest brought Jesus to Pilate, but Pilate really doesn't have any interest in religious disputes. So Pilate told them, try him by your own laws. Now, when the chief priests were trying Jesus, the charge was blasphemy, pure and simple. He was claiming to be what he is, the Son of God. They couldn't tolerate that. So without investigating whether or not he actually was who he claimed to be, they took him to Pilate as a blasphemer. Again, Pilate looked at who was bringing the charges and wanted nothing to do with this, and he wanted nothing to do with them. But to make things right, to cover his bases, Pilate asked a question. What charges are you bringing against this man? Do you remember their response? John 18:30. If he were not a criminal, they replied, we would not have handed him over to you. Now, does that sound like a charge to you? Yeah, they said he was a criminal, but in your average court of law, they need a little more than that to prosecute. And when I say a little, I mean a lot. And so again, Pilate seemed to know this was a religious dispute, and so he invited them to try Jesus themselves, but look at how they answered. John 18:31b. But we have no right to execute anyone, they objected. Now, I know we know this story really well, and so we might just want to take that for granted. Do yourself a favor today. Don't do that. Don't take it for granted. Think it through. Yes, we know Jesus came for this. Yes, I know Jesus was supposed to die for our sins, and yes, I know it was God's will, and I love him for all of this. But today, put yourself in Pilate's sandals. You're not a religious person, or at least you're not Jewish. You're a politician. You're an opportunist. Your life and livelihood depends on you keeping order in your corner of the empire, and you have laws to follow. Now, in your jurisdiction, there's this contentious group of people who have brought someone to you, a man called Jesus. Now, this is not likely the first time you've heard a complaint with that name on it, or at least you've heard of one from these people. But it's always something that you, as a non-Jew, really don't care about. Well, today, that situation is coming to a head. They brought Jesus to you. He's already been roughed up. You ask for the charge, and they can't come up with one. Oh, they have one. They just know it's not something you care about. The religious leaders wanted this Jesus put to death, and they couldn't even come up with a charge. But somewhere between verses 31 and 33, something changes. By the time Pilate got Jesus alone, someone had made a charge, and it was a charge Pilate would have to care about. John 18:33. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, are you the king of the Jews? See, where blasphemy meant nothing to Pilate, king of the Jews was a big problem. King of the Jews, unless appointed by Caesar, was a huge problem. King of the Jews was an insurrection. If Jesus was attempting to overthrow Rome, that was something Pilate would have to do something about. Keep in mind, you could argue that if Jesus really were trying to overthrow Rome, the Jewish people of that day probably wouldn't have turned Jesus over because it was kind of what they wanted. Jesus' response was telling. He asked Pilate, is that your idea, or did others talk to you about me? See, Jesus knows someone has changed the charge. This wasn't something Pilate made up on his own, but when blasphemer failed to gain traction, they had to come up with something new. Was Jesus king of the Jews? Yes, and he was king of everything else as well, but that was not what he was doing on that day. He didn't come to establish an earthly kingdom. He came to bring forth the kingdom of God, an unstoppable kingdom, and their actions were playing right into his hands. Jesus was no insurrectionist. He was no threat to Pilate, at least not in the earthly sense. Jesus' battle was not with flesh and blood. Well, Pilate responded to Jesus' question with a question of his own. Am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it that you have done? Pilate was saying, look, I'm not Jewish. I'm not your problem here. Your real problem here is your own people. What's the problem? What have you done? It's almost as if Pilate is saying, look, someone is going to give me a charge today. The people that brought you to me don't seem to be able to. How about you? Give me something so I can get on with my day. Jesus laid it out for him. In verse 36, he said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. Jesus was saying, if I was a king like you're thinking, do you think I'd be standing here? My guys would have fought. Well, I guess technically they did fight, but only one person got hurt, and Jesus healed him. By the way, that is not the action of an insurrectionist. But when Jesus acknowledged that he had a kingdom, it almost seems as if Pilate figures he finally found his way out. You are a king then, said Pilate in verse 37. Jesus answered, you say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. Now, to be clear, Jesus is a king. He's the King of Kings. And he was on that day as well. Nothing's changed. He was the creator of all that was there. But his purpose was higher than earthly power. Friends, we need to know that too. Because we can get really caught up in this idea that Jesus is here to make our earthly lives better and easier, but following Jesus is not necessarily always the quick route to easy street. Jesus came to testify to the truth. Jesus came to save us from our sins and call us to mission. He came to show us the way to the Father and to be the way to the Father. The religious leaders of his day hated him because he didn't fall into line with them, when what they failed to realize is he is the line. And we cross that line at our peril. And then he made the bold statement, everyone on the side of truth listens to me. The opposite of that statement is also true. Everyone who is not on the side of truth will not listen to Jesus, period. In other words, all the people who were shouting, crucify, from the lowest slave to the high priest, had wandered from the truth of God. They were prideful, and their pride put them in opposition to God. When Pilate failed to realize at that moment, what he failed to realize at that moment, was he had just stepped up to the line. Before him stood truth personified, Jesus Christ. All he had to do was listen. But instead, he asks the question that brings us to our point today. Verse 38, what is truth? Retorted Pilate. It's a good question, isn't it? In the midst of all we're going through today, it's a huge question, and a lot of us are asking it. What is truth? Here we are in the midst of our 8th message apart. We're unable to worship together because we're essentially quarantined because of a disease that is going around. Now, it's not the most deadly thing we've ever faced, but people are dying. And there are all kinds of other problems that go along with being shut down for almost 2 months as well. Questions of economics and lost rights and government overreach. And we live in a world where everyone who wants one can have a media channel of their own and report whatever they want. And then we have the mainstream media channels that are more concerned with politics and political agendas than telling us what's happening. And we have political parties and politicians, many of whom seem to care more about getting reelected than they do about doing what's best for us. And everyone is shouting. And everyone has ideas and conspiracy theories, and they're all leaving us with Pilate's question, what is truth? Today, I want to tell you the truth. Don't ask me when things will get back to normal. I don't know. Don't ask me when we'll be able to worship together again. I don't know. I wish I did. I'd like to start now, but I don't know. Don't ask me who's telling you the truth, Democrats or Republicans, CNN or Fox. I don't know. I have my suspicions, but I don't know. Every time I think I've heard every plausible conspiracy theory, I hear a new one. Some are, like I said, plausible, others sound insane, and sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between the two. Like those chief priests and teachers of the law, I'm pretty sure there's a lot more agenda than there is truth, a lot more about what they want than what is true and good and right, as they stand before the screaming mob egging them on. And sometimes, I confess, I get tempted to jump into the fray. But instead I cry out with Pilate, what is truth? What is truth? Sometimes it's tempting to just throw up my hands and say, wake me when it's over. But God has not called me to crawl back under the covers. God has called me to lead, and by the way, us, His church. We are not called to hide, we are called to lead. And yes, like Pilate, it is really tempting to cry out, what is truth? But even as he posed the question, the truth was staring Pilate in the face. See, in the midst of all the agendas before Pilate was truth personified. All kinds of charges were against Jesus that day. But what did Pilate find when he examined Jesus for himself? I find no basis for a charge against him. That was the truth. And you know what had to happen for Pilate to condemn Jesus anyway? He had to wash his hands of the truth. Let me say that again. Do you know what had to happen for Pilate to condemn Jesus that day? He had to wash his hands of the truth. Let's not wash our hands of the truth. Let's not join the screaming masses. Instead, let's look to the truth. See, we who are in Christ are new creations. We're not like the world anymore, or we're not supposed to be. 1 Peter 2:9 says we're supposed to be a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of Him who called you out of darkness and into His wonderful light. Friends, that's who we are. And we can't do that with conspiracy theories and hearsay from sources trying to advance man-made agendas. We can only do that with the truth. Now, before I go on, I need to tell you, this is a message where the preacher is preaching to himself as much as he's preaching to you. As I prepared that message, this message, I was reminded of the quote from the theologian John Calvin. Calvin wrote this, if the preacher is not first preaching to himself, better that he falls on the steps of the pulpit and breaks his neck than preaches that sermon. My neck is in no danger with this message. The happiest days of my life right now are the days when I see the news the least and stay off social media the most. It's easy to get caught up in the conspiracies. It's easy to get caught up in the lies. It's easy to fall in line with the stories that support what I think. But even as I do, I find myself asking the questions. What if I'm wrong? What if they're misinformed? What if they're lying? What if it's not true? There's a reason why God said in the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20:16, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. I mean, we live in a world that is asking Pilate's question, right? What is truth? And here I am, a Christian. This means I am charged with representing the one everyone needs, the one who said, I am the truth. How I represent him matters, and it matters a lot. This means if I don't know something is true, I can't just share it. Christians, people are depending on us for the truth. It's the truth that sets people free. It's the truth that leads to eternal life. It's really important that people trust us. People say, we're the only Jesus some people will ever see. That, by the way, is not true. Everyone will one day stand before Jesus, and even those who never meet him before the great white throne of judgment will see him. The issue is, by then, it will be too late. We need to point people to Jesus now. Today is the day of salvation, and that means we need to be totally truthful in all things. That leaves us with a dilemma. Because as I stated earlier, it's really hard to know what information you can trust. And if you don't know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can trust it, can you share it? And I think the answer to that question is no. This is where I'm convicted, because I have shared things. I've gotten really amped up over an issue, and especially over this issue that we're facing right now. And I've shared things before I should have. And I've let my frustration get the better of me. And I have vented when I should have just shut up. By now you might be thinking, do we have to be silent then on everything? No. You just have to go with what you know is true. The incredibly good news is in this world that is constantly asking what is truth, there is a source of complete and utter truth that you can share with utter and complete confidence. Near the end of his life, on that night we spoke of for so many weeks, the one some people call Maundy Thursday, in John 17, Jesus got his disciples together and he prayed. He prayed first for himself because of what he was about to face, and then he prayed for the disciples. And in John 17:14, Jesus prayed, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, for they are not of the world any more than I am of the world. Stop there. Guys, the world has all kinds of answers to what we face. And the thing is, they can't all be true or right, because in some cases, they're polar opposites. And everybody seems to be clamoring to take sides based on their agenda, and the agendas are usually attached to grabbing for some sort of worldly power. Which means it's not unlike some of the tactics of the religious leaders outside Pilate's door. They don't care about what's right, they just want to win. And in the process, they leave the world around them asking, what is truth? Take the opposite side of someone else sometime and prepare for the venom to be released. Now, if you really want to upset some people, take God's side, because that usually makes all sides unhappy. But here's the thing. God's side is always the right side. And his answer is the only one that is always, 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 every single time right. There's the world's solution, and there's God's solution. Taking the other sides will help you grab popularity with at least some of the people. But only God's way is right, even if the world hates you for it. See, when we come to Jesus, we answer to a higher authority. We become no longer of this world, and we take God's way. Jesus continued to pray. My prayer is not that you would take them out of the world, but that you would protect them from the evil one. How many times have you looked at our world situation and said, come, Lord Jesus? It's okay to pray that. As long as you realize he's only coming when everything is ready. And the people he has left in charge of making everything ready is the Church of Jesus Christ. In other words, you and me. He's left us in the world, but he hasn't left us. Instead, he filled us with his Spirit to empower us through these dark days, so that we can continue preparing the way. Rather than taking us out, he prayed for our protection, so that we would have the strength to do what he has for us to do in the face of an enemy that will oppose us, just as he opposed Jesus. Jesus won that battle, and in him, so will we. Then look at what our Lord says about us, verse 16. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Translation, they're not like the world anymore. We're not like the world anymore. Instead, we need to be like him. And in verse 17, he tells us how it works. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. Sanctify means to make holy. How are we made holy? In a world full of lies, we're made holy by the truth. And in case anyone is still asking what is truth, Jesus tells us. In his prayer to the Father on behalf of his disciples, which, by the way, is not just 12 men a long time ago, his disciples are his followers, and that includes you. He asks the Lord to make us holy by the truth. And then he says, your word is truth. There it is. In a world asking, what is truth? His word is truth. We need to be in that word, and we need to follow it wholeheartedly, no matter what the world does or says. So if this is true, and it is, How does the Word tell us to deal with these times? First thing is obvious, 1 Timothy 2, starting with verse 1. I urge then, first of all, that petitions, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. This is good and pleases God our Savior, who wants all people to be saved and to come to a knowledge of the truth. We need to be praying for everyone to come to know and follow the Lord Jesus Christ, especially our leaders. Now, this is whether we like them or not, whether we agree with our leaders or not. I posted something a little while ago about praying for our leaders, and a friend of mine almost lost it. I've heard people leaving churches when a pastor has made the statement that we need to pray for our leaders. The person I mentioned hates the leader in question and saw my call for prayer as a statement of support. That's not what it was about. The Bible doesn't ask me to support their positions, nor does it ask me to agree with their positions, nor does it ask whether or not I support or agree with their positions, nor does it ask me if I want to do either of those things. Rather, it is a command to pray regardless. I mean, remember, we serve a God who told us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. When Paul wrote this down, commanding us to pray for our leaders, a guy named Nero was in power. Nero was one of those guys who used to throw Christians to the lions for his personal entertainment. Not only did Nero want Christians dead, Nero wanted to watch it happen, and he was entertained by it. He was evil in a way few of us can imagine. And the command was still to pray, even for him. Why would God ask that? Because there was a reason Nero was in power. And who but God can change a heart? Romans 13:1 says, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Again, this is in the time of Nero. And that might give us serious questions for God. Questions I can't answer except to say, sometimes God gives us leaders to bless a people, and at other times he gives them a leader to drive the people to their knees and back to him. God knows what he's doing. Even in a world that looks like it's gone mad, God knows what he's doing. And when eternity is at stake, God will go to great lengths to turn us from our sins and back to him. Am I saying that's what God is doing in what we're facing? I don't know. But I do believe with all my heart that God is always trustworthy and true. And he will work this out for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. There is something else I need to ask for today. Pray for me. And pray for the other leaders of his church and especially of our church. We have decisions to make as we go back to worshiping together, and how that's going to look, and how to deal with the limitations that the government may put on us when it happens. This is another part of the reason I'm convicted to pray for our leaders. Look, God has called me to lead this church. On a busy week, we have 60 people to lead. Governor Wolf has 12.8 million. Donald Trump has 328 million. I think the decisions I have to make are tough, and I have 7 men to help me. That's around 15% of the church. And I know I have their support and the support of the rest of you with no one working against me, and I still feel the weight. Imagine what their lives are like. We need to be in prayer for these people, whether we like them or not, so we need to pray. Beyond that, we need to be ready. I heard one guy, a prominent businessman, and I saw him say it, proposing some stuff that felt a little like end times, number of the beast kind of stuff. And admittedly, it was a soundbite, and it might be out of context, so I'm not going to go any further, except to say my first thought was that boy needs to read Revelation. And when I see some of the things that are happening as a result of the COVID-19 and the quarantine, I can see how some of the things that happen in the book of Revelation could be brought about. And the same thoughts hit me. But then I had another thought. The business leader and some of the folks setting policy have no reason whatsoever to read Revelation. For one simple reason, they don't believe. For some of them, the stuff that they want to do is stuff that will advance society. That's how they see it. They see it as something that will work for our good. They don't know any better. And folks, there's a group of people the Bible talks about that is responsible for them knowing better. It's called the church. It's us. We can't be mad at them for not knowing because it's our job to teach them. Matthew 24:45. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. Truly I tell you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. Jesus is coming, and we are here to prepare the way. It's up to us to be faithful servants, to be doing what we're called to do when he returns. This is the calling of the church, the whole church, and no one but the church. We who know must be the ones who share because no one else can. When the world asks what is truth, we should be right there, ready to give the answer. Remember 1 Peter 3:15? But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. People need the truth, and we have it. People need the Lord, and he is with us. We need to follow his command to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. Matthew 24:14. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. This is not a time to be afraid. This is a time to stand for the Lord. This is a time to pray and love and serve and teach and to use your gifts to serve the Lord, to go and make disciples, teaching them to obey everything Jesus commanded. In these days of uncertainty, there are some things that we can be certain about. Our God is good. His love is perfect. His word is truth. Jesus is coming, and we are the ones called to prepare the way. So pray and love and teach and share. The world doesn't know what to do. They need the truth. And so I will close with the words of the Apostle Paul from Romans 10. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then can they call on one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they're sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. What is truth? That's the truth. The gospel is the truth. Share it. Amen. This has been the Springfield Church of the Brethren Message of the Week from Pastor Dave Weiss.